Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy that you are joining me for yet another episode and yet another author interview. I say this every week when I have an author interview, but I am loving this part of the podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am, because I really love sitting down with these authors and talking about their books and their writing style and what they read. I just really love getting to know them and their personalities. And this week I had the pleasure of sitting down with author Jeanne M Dickson about her debut novel, Grounded Hearts. Grounded Hearts is a World War II novel set in Ireland, so it's historical fiction, it is romance, and it is also Christian. So it falls under those three different genres, those three different categories. Let me give you the description of the book, and this comes from the author's website, jeannemdickson.com. In the midst of World War II, Ireland has declared herself neutral. Troops found on Irish soil must be reported and interned, no matter which side they are fighting for. When midwife Nan O'Neill finds a wounded young Canadian pilot at her door, she knows she's taking a huge risk by letting him in. Not only is she a widow living alone, but if caught harboring a combatant, she'll face imprisonment. Still, something compels Nan to take in flyboy Dutch Whitney, an RAF pilot whose bomber has just crashed over County Clare. While she tends to his wounds and gives him a secret place of refuge, the two begin to form a mutual affection and an unbreakable bond. But Nan has another secret, one that has racked her with guilt since her husband's death and made her questioned ever-loving again. As Nan and Dutch plan his escape, can he help restore her faith? So that is the description for the book Grounded Hearts by Jeanne M Dickson. As I mentioned, it's historical fiction, and I didn't know, and I love historical fiction, and I was a history major in college, so I'm actually embarrassed to admit that I did not know that Ireland was neutral during World War II. I'd never realized that, and actually in speaking to a couple of other people, they hadn't realized it either. Turns out that not a lot of people know that Ireland was neutral during World War II. So this was really fascinating to get a glimpse into a different part of the world during World War II. I have been going through a phase the last few years where I've been reading a bunch of different World War II novels, so it was really fun to add this one to my repertoire. And as I said, it's also, as you could tell from the description, it's also a romance, and it is Christian fiction, so it has that element of faith, and it has the element of the characters not only trying to navigate their lives and navigate what is happening to them and this relationship, but they're also trying to navigate that through the lens of faith. In Nan's case, she is Irish, and so she's Catholic, Irish Catholic. And so that definitely plays a role in the book. And I found myself occasionally arguing with the 1940s Catholic theology, but, you know, it's very accurate to the time. So it's very good depiction of faith. It's a very good depiction of Ireland. It weaves in that historical element so that you get a picture of what it was like to be in Ireland and have Ireland be neutral during World War II. So that's enough for me. That's enough of my blathering about this book, which I really enjoyed. I'm going to let you listen to Jeannie's own words about the writing process and writing this book. So let's turn now to the interview with author Jeanne M Dickson. Hi, Jeanne. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. So we are here to talk about your book, Grounded Hearts. But before we talk about the book, I would love for my listeners just to get to know you a little bit. If you want to share whatever you're comfortable sharing, that would be great.
Sure. Well, I was born into an Irish-American family, and I was the only girl with 4 brothers. And my grandmother lived with us, and she was this constant source of stories about Ireland and about the saints and about our ancestors that came before us. And I really credit her and my mom and my aunt for my love of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. And so 4 brothers, are they all older? Are you in the middle? Where are you in that birth order?
I am the youngest. I am the second to the youngest. So I have one younger brother, and the rest of them are, of course, are all older.
Right. Wow. That sounds like a very, potentially noisy household.
It was. It was very noisy, very boisterous, and probably made me the tough woman that I am today.
Yes. So you said your grandmother lived with you. Did she grow up in Ireland, or?
Yeah, she was born in Ireland, and actually my dad also was born in Ireland, and my aunt, except for one who was born in Canada. And they migrated first to Canada, and then in the 30s, they immigrated to New York City, to America.
Mm-hmm. So
in a way, I'm the first generation American.
Yeah. Wow. So you grew up with your grandmother, and she told a lot of stories. So Grounded Hearts is set in Ireland. Do you want to talk a little bit about Grounded Hearts?
Yeah, I'd love to. Grounded Hearts, really the germ of the story came from a story that my father actually told me. He was in the military during World War II, mm-hmm. and he was stationed in England. And he was issued a weekend pass, and he decided to go from his base to a base in Northern Ireland. And he got a bicycle, and he was going to go across the border to visit family who were nearby. And he said he pedaled across the border, and a few minutes into his ride, he was stopped by a member of the Garda, which is the Irish National Police. Mm-hmm. And the officer told him that he had to turn his army jacket inside out, or he'd get arrested as a combatant, and he'd be sent to the K-Lines internment camp.
Wow.
So Ireland was neutral during World War II, and they had to do that to comply with their neutrality. So my father, said he did as directed, and there was no further incident, which was fortunate because there were over 240 soldiers on both sides of the conflicts that were interned in Ireland during the war.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because I didn't know that. I don't know why I didn't know that Ireland was neutral, but it was really interesting to find that out.
It is an interesting fact, and not a lot of people know about it. And of course, there's been a lot of World War II stories recently. Mm-hmm. Now that it's pretty far in our past,
right?
But not too many people do. There hasn't been a whole lot about Ireland, and it was a really interesting time for them. They called it the emergency, which is a very Irish way of putting it.
Yeah.
And, they were really between a rock and a hard place. I know that they caught a lot of flack from the English for being neutral, but the way they saw it, from what I understand, is that if they went in with England, with the Allies, then the Nazis would just run them over and just, they had no defenses, completely bomb them. Mm-hmm. And if they went with the Axis, the Germans, then England would have a reason to bomb them. And, basically get rid of them, like mm-hmm. Some would say they've been trying to do for a long time. So they really were between a rock and a hard place. And there was some sympathy for the Axis, I think, when the war first started. But certainly by the end, and all the atrocities came into view, they were really always very pro-Allied. And as far as, the internments, they had to do that, of course, to stay neutral. However, certainly towards the end of the war, they basically did a wink-wink and let the Allies cross over to the north.
So how much research did you do in the background of Ireland in World War II?
Well, I really had to do quite a bit. I mean, some of the stuff came, of course, from family stories. And, once I got a hold of this idea of the, what if, mm-hmm. I bugged my dad about it. So the story has actually been percolating for a very long time because unfortunately he passed away about 8 years ago. But yeah, I had to do research on it. It wasn't that easy. There's not a lot written about Ireland in World War II. I found a couple books that were really great, and of course a couple websites. And then as far as, the sense of being able to feel like being in Ireland, since I lived there as a kid, I had really vivid memories of it. So that part, I just had to dig down and find it.
Right. And you actually bring up, you're able to weave in a lot of that history and a lot of the reasons behind the neutrality and the way people felt about it, the differing sides and why people felt they should be neutral and or not into the story. That's all woven in really nicely. We are going to hear more from author Jeanne M Dickson about the story, about the characters, about the plot, etc. But we do have to take our first break of the podcast, so stay tuned and I will be right back. Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I'm speaking this week with author Jeanne M Dickson about her debut novel, Grounded Hearts. Let's get back to that interview. Talk a little bit then about the story itself and the characters.
Well, again, I just kind of became fascinated with that time area in Ireland, and I did the what if a pilot came to a midwife door and needed help. How would she deal with that? So that was really how I started the idea, and then of course, it takes off from there. It's set. The midwife, Nan, knows that it's a great risk for her to help this guy.
Right.
She could be arrested, and she's been threatened with that by the local authority. But she takes the risk anyway, and she and Dutch, who is the RAF flyer, they really begin to love each other through the process, and he helps her to overcome, this terrible feeling of guilt that she has over her husband's death. And the way, while she's helping him to escape over the border, he's really helping her to escape from this terrible guilt that she carries about her husband's death.
Right. And I was interested, as I was reading, the women really drive this story. Dutch is the main character, the male main character, and he's got his quirks and his personality, things in his personality. But the other men in the story, they kind of get in the way a lot. Is maybe a nice way to put it. To varying degrees. I mean, there's the one guy that's just a complete jerk, and then there's other men that are just kind of, I don't even know what word to use, but it's a really a women-driven story.
Very much so. I grew up with all these really strong women, and part of my favorite part of growing up was when they would get together and we'd sit around the table and they'd tell stories and they'd laugh and they'd joke and they'd rant about their men. It's not that they didn't love them, but they still wanted to rant about them.
Right.
So yeah, there's very strong women in the story, and they do drive the action.
Yeah.
And and also I also wanted to have a lot of humor in the book. Because I think that's always been a very big part of what I experienced growing up. Even though there was always some very painful moments, we could always find some humor in it.
Mm-hmm. So this is it's historical fiction, it's romance, but it could also be classified under Christian writing. So talk a little bit about your faith and how that influences your writing.
Well, I come from a Christian point of view, and it's important to me to view the world in that way. I would say that it really brings me to feel that, we're all sinners and we all make mistakes. and that's what it is to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And the wonderful thing about being a Christian is that we can ask God for our forgiveness for our mistakes, and He grants us amazing grace without any strings attached.
Mm-hmm.
And I like really strong moral characters in stories. They can still be edgy and maybe not the nicest people, but there has to be some moral core to it. And of course, I find that through my faith.
Mm-hmm. And that really comes through in the book, I think, because you do see how their faith lives influence their regular lives, but you made them very human. They've got feelings of guilt. They've got, good senses of humor. They still have feelings of, romantic attraction, lust even, but underlying that is this central core of their faith.
Yeah, I hope that's how it came across. And of course, in Southern Ireland, they would be Catholic.
Right.
And all the baggage that goes with being Catholic. But I think that was really important to the story. I couldn't just gloss over that.
Right. In terms of your writing, when did you begin writing? Is it something that you've always wanted to do?
I pretty much have always been a writer. I think the first time I tried to write a novel, I was in 6th grade, and I was so mad at my brothers, which was pretty common at the time.
I can imagine.
And I can't even remember why I was mad at them, but I'm sure they gave me reasons. But I decided I was going to write a murder mystery and take care of all of them.
That's great.
But of course, it only took me one chapter to finish them off, but it was very satisfying.
I bet. Wow, you were angry. You killed them right away in one chapter.
Yeah, one after the other. But that's not to say I don't love my brothers, but
well, sure.
Kids will be kids.
Yes, who hasn't wanted to,
Yeah, but then pardon?
I was just thinking, who hasn't wanted to, do away with their brother, at least fictionally?
Yeah, exactly. And then, I've always, always liked writing. Out of high school, I actually danced classical ballet for a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
And I really loved it. I'm not sure it really loved me back.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up, going back to college and getting a business degree, which is kind of like the complete opposite. But the writing thing never went away. I was always the person that had to write everything. And then, I really kind of got the bug to really start writing again. And it was right before I had my children. And once I had my children, I really admire women that can write and raise children at the same time, because I found it really difficult.
Sure.
So I kind of had a lapse between that. But then once I got into grade school and high school, I was able to focus on it more. And it's been a long road, and it's I would say that to anyone who's aspiring to write, just be in it for the long haul. Chances are it's going to take you longer than you think.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of that, do you have a certain schedule when you write? Do you try to keep to that? Do you have a favorite place to write? What does that look like for you?
Well, I have an office in my home, and it's crammed full of books and Barbie dolls. I'm kind of addicted to Barbie dolls. My husband thinks they're really creepy because they're just sitting here looking at me, but I find comfort in them. I think they're funny, and they're kind of my muses.
Yeah.
When I start a new story, there's a certain pack of dolls that I take from central casting, and I'll dress them as characters and have them on the desk. And I know that probably does sound a little insane, but
whatever works, though.
Fortunately, I'm married to this great guy, and he is a software engineer. And I don't know how people who don't have access to someone that understands computers can do any of this. Because I'm always going, honey, why? And then, he kind of groans and sits down and he fixes it.
Right. That is good to have around, I agree. Because technology is great until it isn't. And then if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know how to fix it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's next? Are you working on anything right now?
I am. I'm working on a contemporary romance set in Ireland, of course. And it's about 3 sisters who are escaping their father's scandal, insider scandal in the States, and they decide they're going to go to Ireland and open a B&B and wedding venue, but of course nothing goes the way they want it to go, and it's also about, of course, the Irishman that they meet and fall in love with.
Mm-hmm. Oh, fun. And do you think you'll ever return to this world from Grounded Hearts? I mean, you've kind of wrapped up Nan and Dutch's story, but there's some other characters like Dr. Mann. I'm intrigued by her. Do you think you'd ever return to that story or those characters?
I would love to. I would love to return to that story, and actually, that is the story I would like to tell next because she's such a great character. I just love her because she's smart, but she's she's got some issues and she's pretty insecure, and I would love to do that story. Unfortunately, the imprint that I debuted with, it's an Amazon imprint called Waterfall,
Mm-hmm.
they closed their fiction line. They're still doing other nonfiction titles. So I'm kind of without a home here. I hope someday to get back to that story. And I would like to I have ideas for other stories too set in that time period in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a matter of hunkering down and figuring out the stories and then writing it.
Yeah. Actually, there's several stories I think that could come from that world.
Well, thank you. I think it is a world that's very rich in stories and characters that would be fun to follow, to write about.
I'm going to jump in here one more time for our second break of the podcast, but stay tuned and we will be right back. Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. Here is the conclusion of my author interview with Jeanne M Dickson. You said you have an office full of not only Barbie dolls, but books. So who are your favorite authors?
I'm pretty eclectic when it comes to my reading, but I do have a few that I really love. And of course, Maeve Binchy. I really like, for romance, I like Kristen Higgins.
Okay.
Because she's really funny and she's great at world building. And for women's fiction and kind of a general fiction, I like Susan Meisner. She writes these wonderful time slip stories. And I'd say my guilty pleasure is probably Harlan Coben. I still like a good murder mystery.
Even if you're not killing off your own family members.
Yeah, when I'm not killing off my own family.
That's awesome. Okay, so you touched on this a little bit earlier with what you would say to aspiring writers. Do you have anything else that you would, from your perspective of writing, what you would tell them besides, just sticking with it?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you find a community of writers to belong to. For me, I belong to Romance Writers of America, and we have a really active local chapter, which is great because they have a lot of authors and speakers that come in. So whatever your genre is, find a group to belong to, because the people that really understand what you're going through are going to be other writers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I would say is attend writers' conferences. I met both my agent and my editor at a writers' conference, so that's really important. And the other thing is really work on your craft, because it really does come down to the book. Other things are important like social media and stuff, but it really does come down to the book and what the story is about and how well you can craft it. And that just takes time. It's like, I kind of think it's like becoming a ballet dancer. You don't do Swan Lake the day after you start dancing.
Right.
It takes many years of practice.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And speaking of social media, where can people find you on social media?
Well, you can find me on Facebook at Jeanne M Dickson, and on Twitter at JMDickson1, and at Instagram at Jeanne Dickson. But I think if you just type in my name in any of those platforms, you'll find me, and you'll see my picture. I have a picture of me wearing a hat, because I am a hat girl. I always wear hats.
I love hats. Do you have a website?
I do. It's JeanneMDickson.com.
Okay, easy enough to remember. Is there anything else that you would like for people to know about either you or your books or anything in the writing process?
Well, I'd just like to say that being a debut author has been quite a ride. I think it kind of reminds me of when I was going to have my first daughter. I read all the books and I talked to all the moms, and I thought I knew what I was in for. And just like the debut book, it's always great in theory, but when you actually have it, it's kind of another thing, and it's always, of course, very personal as to your circumstances.
Right.
So it's been a rather steep learning curve. It's been fun most of the time, right? But there are things that came up that I really hadn't dealt with before as an unpublished author, like reviews and really a lot more social media and just dealing with all that professional stuff you don't deal with unless you are published.
Yeah, I'm sure it's different for everyone, but that you can't fully prepare for it no matter how much you read or talk to other people, because everybody's experience is going to be different.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your weekend to talk to me. I really appreciate it. It was fun. And thank you for your book, Grounded Hearts, and I wish you all the luck in your next endeavor.
Well, thank you. I wanted to mention one more thing
Sure.
about the book. If you like audiobooks, the narrator for my book is just fabulous. She is a Irish actor.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Alana Curran Collins, and she has the most delightful Irish accent.
Oh, that's awesome. I love audiobooks.
Yes, if you like audiobooks, I would highly recommend that version of the book.
Okay. Is that on Audible, or do you know where you can find it?
It's on Audible. You can find it on Amazon.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And once again, I want to thank my interview guest, author Jeanne M Dickson. It was a pleasure to interview her. It was a pleasure to read her debut novel, Grounded Hearts. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and I hope that you will join me again next time when I will probably be having another author interview, trying to get that scheduled right now. There's been a little bit of a hiccup in getting that scheduled, but hopefully things will work out and I'll have another author interview for you next week. You can always check social media to see who I will be interviewing, because I usually put something up a few days beforehand and then you'll know what's going on. Speaking of social media, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. You can find all of our podcasts at www.gsmcpodcast.com, and you can download those podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, any app that you use on your mobile devices. Thank you again to Jeanne M Dickson for joining me. Thank you for listening. But now I want you to go out there and get yourself lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.